Any questions about what's going to be on the exam?
Yeah, what's exactly?
No, not like a specific question. You clear about what's going to be tested? Mostly covering things that are represented in both the book and lecture. That's going to be where most things come from. Although, the things where we covered a little bit extra here, that's certainly going to be represented as well. Think about 50 questions. I'm almost done with the practice exam. Whatever the practice exam has, that'll be pretty close to what the real thing has. Nobody has questions? Yeah.
You don't need any test book or scan.
No, you don't need a scan card. You're gonna get a sheet with some blanks on it for your letters or words or whatever. Yeah, and you'll fill that out. And that's good. No scan card. Okay. What we're going to be doing today is, in some ways, it's an opportunity for you guys to summarize a lot of what we've learned, particularly with the cardiovascular system. This involves the regulation of blood pressure, and we can, along the way, we'll sort of put in a little bit of references to material you should have learned, and hopefully it'll help jog your memory, or at least give you some action items of things you need to brush up on. So, when we cover this, we're dealing with homeostasis, right? Whenever we deal with homeostasis, we have very often some sort of event happening to the body, and then we have a correction to that. And sometimes the things that happen to our bodies, like the lowering of mean arterial pressure, will be offset by raising mean arterial pressure. And so I think it's very helpful to begin to delineate cause and effect, right? So we're going to call our initial event the thing that's happened to our body. So it could be a hemorrhage, it could be dehydration, for example. Something's happened to our body. And we'll refer to this as the initial event, okay? All right, here's some examples. And then we have the effects of this on the body. This is the insult to the body, okay? So if we have a hemorrhage, what's going to result from a hemorrhage is loss of blood, right? We're going to have a low blood volume. We might lower our mean arterial pressure as a result of that low blood volume, right? So this is the thing that becomes the problem. Okay, that's the insult to our body. The thing that we are going to respond to. Okay, so we'll have a response. This will be sensory detection. And we'll learn about the fact that we have baroreceptors, which are a great way to detect that we've lost blood volume. Okay, and we'll have some reflexes. We're gonna focus our efforts today learning about the neurological reflexes, and there are some endocrine reflexes which I don't think your book really covers. May have mentioned. Likewise, we'll mention it, but we'll sort of save it until we get to the urinary system because we need to know how the kidneys work to really appreciate what's happening. Okay, but we can have reflexes that are neurological, or we can have endocrine reflexes. So these are things that respond to the stimulus, the sensory detection that that has occurred. Right? And then, here's some examples of that. And then we have the adaptation, right? So we want to respond to the mean arterial pressure, right? We're going to do that by detecting the low pressure with baroreceptors. Right? We're going to have some reflexes involved in the nervous system. And then we'll have our adaptation, which would be the things that we can do to kind of correct the problem. Now, this is not exhaustive here, so don't take this as an exhaustive list of all the things that can happen with hemorrhage, dehydration, and these are just examples. But we're going to use this framework on the left to kind of make sure that we have our causal chain of events ordered properly, okay? Because it can get a little confusing. Okay, crack in the floor. Maybe it's the line. Never fallen over in class. Yeah, thank you, guys. Even when I had a broken toe a couple years back, thanks to my kids. And I'd walk around with a cane. I was really bad after the cane at school. And then I almost broke my not yet. Still hasn't happened. Okay. So, here's a question to try to get at this issue. All right, instead of your daily multivitamin, you accidentally take Uncle Joe's hypertension medication. All right, this is an alpha-1 antagonist. So let's quickly define what that is. Anytime I use the term antagonist with regard to receptor, what does that mean? It has the opposite effect of the normal ligand, or more accurately, I guess, it prevents the ligand from working. Right? So you get the opposite effect. Okay? So these are a bunch of things that can happen in response to an alpha antagonist. Okay? Which of these are the result of the insult of taking that medication? And then which of these are your body's responses to that change? Okay? So we're going to have an insult that causes a bunch of things to happen. And then our body is going to say, something's not right here. We are going to fix it by doing X, Y, or Z. Okay? So see if you can sort through these. I would have you just get with somebody close with you and see if you can run through these quickly. Some of them are going to be pretty easy. Okay, but I just want you to make sure you have the difference in your minds. Okay? So just take a minute or two and we'll sort through these. An example of something that would be part of our insult to our alpha-1 antagonist. Yeah. Increased vasodilation. Why would that be? Okay, she said alpha-1 antagonist, alpha-1 is something that when stimulated is going to cause vasoconstriction, so an antagonist to that receptor would do the opposite, right? And that's right. So that's, and if we're, insults can sort of have their own cause and effect, right? One thing happens and then the next thing happens. But all these things that happen are distinct from our body's response. Okay. What else would be an insult here? Anybody? Yeah?
Decreased total peripheral resistance.
Decrease CPR, right? Arterioles provide resistance, right? And by dilating, they're going to provide less, right? So the total peripheral resistance will decline, right? What else? Yeah. Decreased mean arterial pressure? Yeah. Right? The lowered resistance results in a lowered MAP. Anything else? Okay. What about physiological adaptation? Somebody tell me why. Nobody had any others? Is there something else you want to include here? Venous return. Why does venous return go down? Less blood is getting back to the heart, but why? What does alpha-1 do to veins? Do you remember? Yeah, alpha-1 stimulation constricts veins, right? Which increases their venous pressure and therefore increases venous return. So by relaxing those veins, we're going to have less venous return. Right? Anything else you want to put on that list? Part of the insult? Okay. Stroke volume goes up. Why would that happen? This is part of physiological adaptation. Why would stroke volume go up? What's telling it to go up? Okay, so let's fill in the blanks here a little bit. When we have an insult, our body has to sense it, right, and then have some reflexive response to it. So what's going to be the sensor that's usually going to respond to something like this? Baroreceptors, yeah, I assume you read about those, right? We'll talk about that a little bit further. Baroreceptors are detecting low pressure, okay? And reflexively, we're going to respond by stimulating the heart to be more contractile, right? We have a stronger contraction for the other script line. What else would we do to the heart? Increase its rate, right? Together, these two things are gonna do what? Increase cardiac output, which does what? Increases pressure. Okay. What about TPR? Why would that go up? Same thing, right? The cardiovascular system is stimulating our arterioles. Okay. So there's a question though, with an antagonist there, can we really stimulate those arterioles? Maybe. Maybe. Okay. So let's walk through our process here and start with the insult. And we're going to use hypovolemia as our starting point. So this could be a hemorrhage, right? You lost some blood. Could be dehydration, water. Okay. But what's going to be affected first? The very first thing we could say as part of this insult is that we've lost volume, right? We've lost volume. And when we lose volume, it affects veins preferentially, right? Why? Do you remember? Veins are the volume reservoir, right? Because of their compliance, right? They very easily take on extra or lose volume, whereas our arteries don't change their volume very much. Okay? So in a low venous volume, right? And a low venous volume means a low venous blood pressure, which means low venous return. That make sense? So venous return is again, it's the volume per minute, right? This is the counterpart to the cardiac output, the amount of volume going back to the heart per minute. Everybody on board with this? Question? Yeah?
It says like overall, so would the opposite, everything hyper be opposite for
We're
everything?
going to talk about that in just a second. The next thing, of course, is that with a low venous return, we will end up with a low stroke volume. Can somebody explain why that would necessarily follow? Yeah.
The amount going into the heart and the amount going out of the heart are always the same.
Okay.
So if there's less return from the veins, then there would be less going back out
There's
of
less.
the ventricles.
Yeah. There's less going to fill the heart. There's less going out of the heart as stroke volume. What do we call that relationship? Preload, right? Preload is the degree of stretch, but it's directly related to how much filling takes place, right? Remember preload? So if we have a reduced venous return, we're going to have a smaller end diastolic volume, right? Less filling. And so the heart is going to be contracting more weakly. Okay? Which means our cardiac output is going to go down. And remember, this is all part of the insult. This is not what we want to have happen, but this is a direct sort of physical result of our blood loss. Okay. All right, and that lowered cardiac output will lower our mean arterial pressure. So does this follow? One thing after the next? Any questions about how we went from one place to the next? Okay. These are all principles that we've kind of covered a little bit in the past. I don't want to, this is a great way to sort of stick them all together in a real world situation. It's not just hypothetical. Okay, so now, what if we have hypervolemia? All right, let's just walk ourselves through it, make sure that we have the same understanding here. So let's say we've got a high blood volume. Okay? It's going to preferentially affect the veins, right? Veins will take on that extra volume. So venous volume goes up. What happens to venous blood pressure? It goes up. And that extra pressure pushes more blood into the right atrium, right? So our venous return increases as well. Okay? More venous return means what for the stroke volume? It goes up, right? This is preload with the Frank-Starling principle. Cardiac output goes up. Mean arterial pressure goes up. Yeah, so this is the exact opposite of what we said before, right? Because these are all essentially physical properties of our cardiovascular system that we're dealing with. Right? Volume changes, compliance issues with where volume goes, and Frank-Starling law and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
What would be an example of where you would see hypervolemia?
Hypovolemia? Hypervolemia. Where would you see that? If you drank too much water, would be a great way to do it. Too many blood transfusions? No, give me 5 minutes. I don't. Yeah, hypovolemia is the reason that your book and the reason that I'm going to be going through and talking more about hypovolemia and hemorrhage is because this is far more common. Okay, but you can. I would expect that you'd be able to sort of extrapolate the opposite. Okay. Okay. So all these things have happened, right? And now we can respond, right? We can't respond to nothing. We can't respond to just, there's a blood loss. We respond to, in this case, the drop in pressure that accompanies that. Okay. So of that initial insult, the thing that we can detect is the low mean arterial pressure. Okay. All right, and the way that we do this, there's a couple ways we do this. The one we'll focus on here is this is our baroreceptors. We have baroreceptors, pressure sensors, located in the carotid sinus. All right, so carotid arteries are headed up to your head. Okay, you've got the internal carotid, goes to your brain, external, it goes to your face, and right where they fork, at the bifurcation, you have the carotid sinus. Okay, group of cells that are sensitive to pressure. So barobarometers sense air pressure. This is a baroreceptor sensitive to blood pressure. Note where it is, right? It's not in the veins, so we're not detecting venous pressure, and it's not in all arteries, it's not in the pulmonary arteries, it's in the systemic circuit. That's where it is. Okay. It's also, there's an aortic sinus that does the same thing, right? So both of these are detectors of pressure, and they're considered tonic receptors. Anybody know what that means, tonic? Yeah. Oh, you do? Yeah. The carotid sinus seems to be probably more active and more important. The aortic sinus is a little less active in terms of informing our brain. And I should say that we have aortic sinuses and carotid sinuses that go to both sides of our brain. Right? There's cranial nerves that take this up. Okay? So there's a carotid sinus on the right and a carotid sinus on the left. But what they do is a tonic receptor is one that is always on. Okay? So the neurons are not waiting for a stimulus, they're always providing action potentials. And that's represented by these little hash marks on the bottom here. But what makes a tonic receptor useful to the brain is that it changes the rate of firing. So when we elevate mean arterial pressure, we get a faster rate of action potential production headed to the brain. And when mean arterial pressure drops, we get a lower frequency. Okay? Lots of receptors work this way, our ears work this way. Our ears are constantly signaling to our brain. And it's the changes that are detected. So that's a tonic receptor. Tonic means always on. And this is where we get the term for muscle tone. Muscle tone is when muscles are slightly stimulated all the time. Okay. So where does this information go? It's going to go up to the brain, but we detect it here in the arteries. Okay? There are venous baroreceptors. And we find these in the large veins. and in the atria of the heart itself. And we don't know as much about these. In fact, we're not going to spend much time talking about them at all. But because of the fact that they're in veins, some people, they do respond to pressure, but people like to refer to these as volume receptors. Okay. And the reason being is that veins are at low pressure, right? And those little changes in venous pressure reflect venous volume changes, right? And venous volume changes are reflective of blood's volume changes. So there are venous baroreceptors, and they do seem to play a less significant or less immediate role in responding to these changes, but they are important. Okay, so we have a sensory system in our baroreceptors. We also have an endocrine portion of this. The kidneys can respond to high blood pressure, low blood pressure, and they'll release the hormone renin. Heard of that? Okay. Or renin, either one. Okay. But we're going to focus on the neural side of this. Right? So the reflex is how we respond to it, right? We've got to take that signal from the arteries and do something with it, right? So what happens? There are cranial nerves. Remember cranial nerves? Who doesn't love cranial nerves? How many cranial nerves do we have? A lot. We do. How many? 12. Wrong. How many? 13. Also wrong.
11? 14.
14. No.
3,000.
Okay, how many pairs do we have? 12 pairs. Yeah. Or 13. Depending on whether you count cranial nerve number 0. Nobody does, right? Okay. And there is no Roman numeral for 0, right? Or is there? Roman numeral experts, whatever. No. You guys can't even read a clock with Roman numerals, can you? Can you? Good, my kids can't. No. Completely baffled. All right. Glossopharyngeal nerve, what number is that, by the way? You've had a moment to think about this, right? Yeah, cranial nerve number 9. Vagus? 10. Okay. So these are cranial nerves that will take sensory information from your carotid sinus in the case of 9 or aortic sinus in the case of 10. So you can lose one of these cranial nerves, the function in one of them, and still retain some baroreceptor function, okay, which is important. And yes, you can lose function of cranial nerves, right? Tumors in the brainstem and so on. Okay. All right, so that's good to know. All right, where do these signals go? They go to the medulla, the brainstem. Right? The medulla has cardiac centers that respond to this sensory input. Okay, what do they do with it? In the case of low blood pressure, right, hypovolemia, hemorrhage, what happens is a sympathetic response. Okay? And the sympathetic response, these sympathetic nerves, preganglionic, postganglionic, I'm not going to review it now. But what are we stimulating? We're going to stimulate the SA node. And what happens? Let's be really granular here. What is this neuron releasing? Norepinephrine. What's it binding to? Beta. How many hearts do you have? 1. Beta 1 receptor. That's how you remember it. You have 1 on lot. Beta 1 receptor, which is coupled to kind of G protein. GS, right? So it's adenylyl cyclase, right? Cyclic AMP, right? We're going to open up channels a little bit more. Which ones? HCN and T-type calcium. Yeah, some of you got it. Good. If this sounds foreign to you, go back and review it. I don't expect it to all the tip of your tongues right now, but yeah. Okay, and so we're going to accelerate our pacemaker potential, right? And we'll have greater. Okay. We also stimulate the AV node, not that it matters, that matters. This actually helps the conduction speed a little bit. But so long as the SA node is working, AV node is not really our pacemaker, but we do have that stimulus. And then what's happening down here? At the bottom. What is this illustrating? What are those neurons making contact with? Contractile cells, right? And so we're going to, again, norepinephrine release, right? All that kind of stuff. And end up with more calcium in the cell, we get greater contraction, and therefore we elevate our stroke volume, right? So this sympathetic response here, innervating both electrical cells or conduction cells, rather, and also stimulating the contractile cells, will have the effects of elevating heart rate, stroke volume, right? Okay. So that's more into the response, but you can see this reflex, right? We're going from baroreceptors through the nervous system and down through the sympathetic nervous system to respond to our low blood pressure. Okay. Two other targets to be aware of, or two other types of targets. We have arterioles, and we have veins and venules. What does the sympathetic nervous system do to arterioles? Constricts, right? Why? Norepinephrine stimulates alpha 1 receptors, and we'll get vasoconstriction. Going to stimulate veins, venules, right? Also through alpha 1 receptors. Remember all this stuff? Okay. And we're going to get an increase in venoconstriction. Okay, so the sympathetic response here, part of this reflex, is going to stimulate the heart and arterioles and venules. Seems like overkill, right? It's a lot of stuff. Okay. What if our stimulus is high blood pressure instead? Our carotid sinus and aortic sinus, we'd have a slower frequency of action potentials going up along the cranial nerves, right? What's going to be the response? Not the sympathetic response, but what is it? Parasympathetic. One thing to note is that our parasympathetic response is through the vagus nerve. It is only to the heart and does not extend to blood vessels. Okay. So the parasympathetic nervous system will slow down, right? It's releasing acetylcholine, which binds to which type of receptors? Muscarinic, yeah, M2 receptors that are on the pacemaker, right? Maybe a small bit of innervation to the contractile cells of the atria, we talked about that, right? But primarily we're going to be affecting the SA node, okay? And we'll slow down the heart. Okay, so when we have a situation where there's high blood pressure, we respond by stopping the sympathetic stimulation, okay? And we're actively antagonizing it here at the heart. What are the blood vessels going to do if they no longer receive their sympathetic stimulation? Yeah, they'll relax. They can relax. They're not actively told to relax. They just relax due to lack of sympathetic stimulation. I want to point out one thing, not directly related to our reflex, but kind of important. We've got a bunch of things over here on the left that feed into the same system. Okay. So the cardiac centers are not just automatically transmitting these signals. They take in lots of inputs to make decisions. Okay. So arterial baroreceptors are important, obviously, but there are other things like proprioceptors. What are proprioceptors? What do they respond to? Pain. Those are nociceptors. Yeah.
Body position.
Yeah, these are the receptors we have in our muscles and joint ligaments that are receptive to movements of the body. And so this informs the brain about movements and body position. That sort of thing. Okay. Why would that be important to this system? If you start moving around, dare I say exercising, what do you want your heart to do? Accelerate, yeah. So your heart doesn't always wait until it's at depleted of oxygen before it gets moving. It's going to respond to lots of things. So movement, photoreceptors. We have chemoreceptors that tell us about the state of our gases in our blood. We'll talk about this with the respiratory system. So lots of things here that we want to include in our decision about, do we speed up the heart? Do we slow it down? How much do we speed it up, slow it down? Okay. It's a good thing we don't have to make these decisions for ourselves, right? Our brains do it for us. But it's, there's lots of things that feed into this. So just keep that, file that back in somewhere in your brain, to remind you of that. Okay, so it's not a simple reflex like a knee-jerk reflex that can't really change, right? Yeah?
So did you say that glottis, pharyngeal, and vagus nerve, they both work with the sympathetic system, but only the vagus nerve would work with the parasympathetic?
I would prefer you think of it like the vagus and the glossopharyngeal here are functioning in sensory reception. Okay, so these are sensory neurons here in the loop. Okay. And neither of them are involved in sympathetic output. Okay, so sympathetic is purely motor, right? Is that confusing anybody? So sympathetic and parasympathetic are output from the CNS, they're motor. And what you're seeing here in these blue arrows, blue lines, this is sensory bringing information too. So what we can say about the parasympathetic? Oh, great, that's cool. Yeah. What we can say about the parasympathetic innervation is that it travels along the vagus nerve. Okay. So the vagus here you can see has a sensory component and a motor component, and the motor is parasympathetic. And then down here at the bottom, in red, coming out of the spinal nerves here, that's the sympathetic, and that's motor. Okay, so that's only sympathetic coming out of the spinal nerves. So sensation travels up the cranial nerves, parasympathetic goes down the cranial nerves, and sympathetic goes out the spinal nerves. Is there, yeah? So there are medications that can affect the parasympathetic nervous system at different locations. So it could be at the level of the target organ, like the heart, in which case it's like a an M2 agonist, for example, or it can be happening at the level of the CNS where those neurons originate. So they start in the CNS, right? And if it's in the CNS, it's probably going to have wider effects than just the heart. Yeah.
Can you repeat what you said about the beta-1 receptor?
The beta-1 receptor? Beta-1 receptor would be found in the heart, and beta-1 receptor is the sympathetic target. Okay, so the beta-1 receptor responds to norepinephrine, and it's going to have the GDS protein, make cyclic AMP, right? Yes, norepinephrine will bind to alpha-1 or beta-1. Yeah. For our purposes, let's assume that norepinephrine and epinephrine can bind all adrenergic receptors. They do have their own specificities, like beta-2 is more sensitive to epinephrine than norm, but for our purposes, we're not going to worry about that. questions about this? All right, reflexes, good. And, yeah. Don't know why this happened. All right, so carotid sinus massage. Doesn't sound that great, does it? Massage, yeah, that's right. And then you put carotid sinus in front of it. It's like,
Just want to head on.
I don't know that I want that. Carotid sinus massage, it's not a massage, it's basically applying pressure and moving it a little bit. Hardly a massage. It's a bedside technique to lower heart rate when a patient is experiencing tachycardia. What is tachycardia? High heart rate. Okay, so it's an excessively high heart rate. Or other sympathetic arrhythmias. What explains how pushing on the carotid sinus lowers the heart rate? Okay. Are you all influenced by one another's modes? You are, aren't you? That's good. Sometimes it's bad on both. All right. A lot of people here like, you're elevating, I can hardly read this, you're elevating the pressure in the sinus, initiating a parasympathetic response. Okay, so how can you, so we have blood pressure, right? And we're responding to blood pressure. That seems, let's say a little cross section through our vessel, right? We've got a little patch of baroreceptors here in our carotid artery, right? Neurons will take that signal back to the brain, no problem. So they're responding to the pressure inside of here. Okay? And when you massage a carotid artery, what you're doing is you're applying additional pressure. Okay, so there's blood pressure inside of it, pushing against the walls and all this sort of thing, right? But if you push on the outside of it, right? Use your stubby finger, right? I was trained in anatomy. Can you believe it? If you push on that, you're adding pressure to it. Right? So don't do this to yourself. But you could massage the carotid artery, and what it will do is it will lower your heart rate. Okay. And it's this is a way of it's useful in diagnosing sort of the origin of the problem. Right? Maybe you've got a baroreceptor problem. But people who have sort of a runaway tachycardia, this can actually slow their heart rate. If you do this to yourself, just to experiment, don't do that. I didn't advise you to do that. I'm not a doctor. Not a real doctor. As medical students used to tell me. Anyway, don't do that. But if you do that, don't do it on both sides at the same time, because you can block blood flow to your heart, to your brain. Bad things to say. All right, so yeah, that's the right answer. That's what this thing does. So we can artificially stimulate this, but the idea is, right, follow it through. You have stimulation, you're elevating pressure, right? You're elevating pressure, right, which leads to increased